there is one truth capable of piercing the heart, of sending a cold shiver down one's spine, when one truly delves into the seemingly glorious currents of history, it is this. Great cities are built not solely from the luminous ideals of civilization or magnificent urban blueprints, but, more profoundly, from the bitter sweat, unspoken fears, and ultimate, often unacknowledged, endurance of countless ordinary individuals. Berlin, in 1750, serves as a stark, living blueprint of this brutal reality. At first glance, it was a capital rapidly asserting its might under the powerful reign of Frederick the Great, a city relentlessly expanding, harboring audacious ambitions to stand shoulder to shoulder with Europe's most splendid metropolises, steadily claiming its rightful place on the map of power and culture. Yet, merely by wandering slowly into a few obscure streets, by pausing for more than a few minutes amidst the acrid coal smoke, the sodden mud, and the silent, bowed figures passing by, an entirely different truth would gradually emerge, one both harsh and hauntingly compelling. Behind the glittering facade of iron order, limitless ambition, and supreme power lay a life defined by breathtaking hardship. Here, every person grappled daily under the crushing weight of unyielding military discipline, of poverty that lingered like a persistent, unwelcome shadow, of ceaseless, exhaustive labor, and of an ever-present, never truly vanishing insecurity that gnawed at the soul. And what makes this story utterly compelling, demanding to be heard to its conclusion, extends far beyond the historical pages of one particular city. It resonates with a deeper, more universal truth. The more closely we observe 18th century Berlin, the more profoundly we grasp the true, often immeasurable, cost of what is so frequently labeled progress, a price typically paid by the humble destinies and forgotten names of those whom history has all too often erased. Let us commence this journey at dawn, when the first faint rays of sunlight struggled to penetrate the pervasive mist and dust upon the long bridge spanning the river Spree. The swift current flowing beneath was neither pristine nor verdant, unlike the poetic rivers often depicted in romantic paintings. Instead, it was thick, heavy, with the undeniable stench of raw sewage, decaying refuse, and all manner of waste from a city ballooning at dizzying speed, far outstripping its own nascent capacity for self-purification. The morning air, which should have carried cool freshness and the clean scent of damp earth, was, in Berlin that year, sharp with pervasive coal smoke, foul with horse manure that clogged the cobbled streets, and somewhere, a lingering, hard-to-name metallic tang, sour and heavy, like the very scent of an invisible yet suffocating tension that perpetually hung over every resident. From that vantage point, Berlin revealed itself as a colossal, tightening fist. The 5 old quarters of Alt-Berlin, Köln, Friedrichswerder, Dorotheenstadt, and Friedrichstadt crammed together, compressed into a single, suffocating urban space. Over 100,000 souls were squeezed into these cramped confines, traversing streets that were mostly unpaved, turning ankle-deep in mud during the bitter winter months, and choking with gritty dust in summer, where every breath felt like inhaling fine sand. Daily drinking water had to be drawn from public wells, which were frequently scarce and dangerously unsanitary. At night, patrols, armed with lanterns and swords, moved silently through the labyrinthine streets to prevent fires and theft. Meanwhile, artisan guilds rigidly enforced their strict rules, often stifling genuine innovation. Yet, in the opulent palaces and aristocratic salons, scholars enthusiastically debated the lofty Enlightenment ideals of freedom and equality. 2 entirely opposing worlds coexisted within one city, starkly divided, one discoursing on intellect, philosophy, and the grand future of mankind, while the other simply worried about surviving another day, about securing enough food to feed their families. Leaving the bridge, the road leading into the artisan quarter was already bustling and warming up from early morning, with the sounds of tireless labor echoing from low-slung brick houses. This was where Berlin strove with immense effort to transform itself from a mere military garrison town into an ambitious manufacturing hub, its air thick with workshop smoke and the constant clang of machinery. In the silk weaving workshops, temperatures could become stifling and oppressively hot, making the air thick and heavy with humidity. Steam billowed from colossal dyeing vats where pristine white fabrics were immersed to acquire vibrant, rich colors. Here, French Huguenots, Protestants who had fled severe religious persecution in their homeland, toiled diligently alongside native German apprentices. They carried not only the painful memories of exile and profound loss, but also brought with them refined skills, inherited trade secrets, exquisite craftsmanship, and a burning, unyielding desire to rebuild their lives from the ashes of the past. It was their hands and minds, their unwavering spirit, that propelled Berlin's nascent transformation, laying the vital foundations for Prussia's burgeoning industry. But behind that promising narrative of development lay a colder, far more brutal and unpalatable truth. Children, seedlings who should have been at play or engaged in learning, were also forced to work here, their small figures blending into the industrial landscape. A boy, barely 12 years old, with small, weary hands already hardened by toil, threaded yarn through a hand-operated loom, his young eyes needing to maintain intense, unblinking focus, his hands forbidden to falter for even a single beat. In that era, the steam engines of the later Industrial Revolution had not yet appeared, but rudimentary, cumbersome mechanical looms were dangerous enough to cause tragic accidents at any moment, capable of snatching away a finger, an arm, or even a precious life. And once unfortunate enough to be injured and consequently unable to work, laborers lost their wages instantly, a cruel reality meaning their families would face imminent starvation. 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, that was the unforgiving daily rhythm, the relentless cycle that wore down thousands of lives, consuming their youth and vitality. The steady clatter of looms echoed like the city's tired, relentless heartbeat, intermingled with the jarring clang of hammers on metal, the creaking of wooden wheels under immense weight, and voices calling out amidst the hot smoke and the immense pressure of work. Listen closely, and these were not merely the sounds of diligent labor. They were, in fact, the haunting sounds of human lives being slowly worn away, gradually crushed to feed the growing, hungry machine of the city. The most poignant aspect, I believe, the deepest sorrow, was not just the crushing physical hardship, but the profound irony that so many of these silent laborers understood they were contributing to building a brilliant future for Berlin, yet remained profoundly uncertain whether they themselves, or their own children, would ever secure a place, any meaningful share, in that bright, glittering future. History often extols magnificent architectural feats, decisive political turning points, or enlightened, powerful monarchs. Yet a city, any city, is never erected solely by the iron will and grand visions of its leaders. It is built more fundamentally by bent backs, stooped under heavy burdens, by hands hardened to calluses from ceaseless manual labor, and by childhoods prematurely bartered away, stripped of the fundamental right to simply be children, the right to an education, the right to dream. Leaving the noisy and stifling workshops, the crowds flowed northwards, towards Molkenmarkt, where the struggle for sustenance manifested itself in its most primal and explicit form. This was one of Berlin's most vital food distribution centers, an absolutely essential destination for every household striving to survive. Each early morning, farmers from the surrounding Brandenburg villages would arrive, their carts laden with fresh grain, vibrant vegetables, and raw meat, carrying both fragile hope and gnawing worry. But this entire food distribution system was far more fragile than it appeared. Even a gentle breeze or slight change in temperature could threaten its immediate collapse. There was no real refrigeration, no effective preservatives, and no rigorous quality control to speak of. Food spoiled rapidly, often within mere hours in the heat of the day, and spoiled food, consumed out of desperation, could claim human lives even faster. A butcher, his face weathered and deeply lined by sun and wind, displayed fresh slabs of beef openly in the warm, dusty air. Flies, those unwelcome harbingers of disease, immediately swarmed, forming dark, swirling clouds around his wares. Early market-goers had the chance to buy fresher, safer goods, provided, of course, they had the money and could afford the premium. Those who arrived later, due to unrelenting poverty or the demands of their work, were often compelled to purchase cheaper items, knowing full well they were gambling with their precious health and very lives. Interspersed among the stalls of native German merchants were French-speaking vendors, mostly Huguenots, deftly promoting finer, more fragrant breads, delicate pastries, and exotic spices. Their superior craftsmanship and culinary sophistication allowed them to command higher prices, but this also, inevitably, fanned the flames of simmering resentment. Native German merchants openly displayed their discomfort at the perceived uneven competition, feeling deeply threatened in their own trade. Meanwhile, the French, despite having demonstrably enriched the city with their skills and intellect, often felt like perpetual outsiders, exiles never fully embraced by their new home. The delicious aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the faint, unsettling scent of meat beginning to turn in the sun, while a cacophony of haggling voices in German and French created a chaotic symphony of daily life. And amidst it all was an unspoken truth. In a city like Berlin in 1750, the seemingly simple question of what to eat today was, in reality, a grueling, daily battle for survival. From the noisy and chaotic market, we proceed to where power brazenly and proudly displayed itself, manifested through solid stone, disciplined order, and absolute cold calculation. The grand boulevard of Unter den Linden. This majestic avenue stretched from the magnificent royal palace to the Brandenburg Gate, which, at that time, was not yet the celebrated symbol of victory it would later become, but primarily a strict toll and control post on the city's vital edge. The boulevard was meticulously and ambitiously planned, intended to rival the most prestigious thoroughfares of Paris or Vienna, with trees planted in military-like precision, forming perfect, regimented rows. In summer, these trees were lush and provided welcome, if carefully regulated, shade. In winter, their bare branches offered an unobstructed, clearer view, very convenient for observing and controlling all movement. Here, even nature itself was compelled to serve the strategic interests and absolute control of the Prussian state. Luxury carriages rolled slowly and deliberately along the cobbled boulevard, carrying officers in smart, deep blue uniforms, wealthy merchants in opulent silk cloaks, and foreign diplomats intently observing Berlin's daily transformation, a carefully curated performance. Above the avenue, colossal architectural projects were springing up like mushrooms after rain. The magnificent opera house, the splendid public library, and stately academic buildings, symbols of a grand vision. The city no longer wished to be known merely as a dry military fortress. It yearned to become a vibrant cultural capital, a spiritual heart of Europe, a formidable rival to the greatest capitals of the age. But what truly created the breathtaking tension within this seemingly glorious panorama was the profound, aching chasm between its magnificent, ambitious facade and the harsh, unforgiving reality of daily life for most of its inhabitants. On one side stood the lofty ambitions of civilization and intellect, towering and bright. On the other, cramped, squalid residential areas swallowed families whole into the relentless, exhausting daily grind of mere survival. And that was where the majority of Berlin's residents truly lived, not in grand palaces or glittering theaters, but in low, two-story houses that served as both cramped workshops and humble homes. The ground floor was typically a tailor's shop, a carpenter's workshop, or a manual soap-making operation, where the pungent, inescapable smells of fabric, wood, and soap mingled in the air. Upstairs, entire families crowded together, with little to no concept of privacy. Apprentices often slept right in the workshop, on a hard wooden bed, their weary bodies finding what rest they could. Servants huddled in leaky attics, exposed to the elements. Small children, parents, and grandparents frequently shared a single cramped room, breathing the same stale air, sharing everything from sparse meals to fitful sleep. Privacy, for them, was a luxury that barely existed, a distant, unimaginable concept. Wooden staircases, worn smooth and shaky from the steps of countless generations, were desperately short of light, showing only dark, treacherous streaks. After sunset, the streets relied primarily on the flickering, unreliable glow of oil lamps or the dangerous blaze of torches. A slight misstep could easily lead to a broken leg or, worse, a fatal fall. While doctors were a medical service, only the truly wealthy dared consider. The rest simply resigned themselves to fate and prayed for relief. The smells in these residential areas were not subtle or hesitant. They assaulted one's senses directly and unpleasantly. The acrid smell of burnt cooking, the lingering odor of unwashed bodies, the damp, musty scent of clothes not properly dried, the stench of night pots awaiting disposal in the morning all combined to create a distinctive, inescapable aroma of poverty and acute deprivation. There was no modern sewerage system. Dirty water, household waste, and even human urine flowed freely and openly in the street channels, emitting noxious fumes and becoming fertile breeding grounds for germs and disease. Diseases spread faster than people could move, sweeping through every neighborhood, every family, with devastating speed, especially during frequent epidemics. Reading this, I believe what posterity truly needs to remember is not how accustomed to hardship our ancestors seemingly were, or how passively they endured it. Rather, it is the profound understanding that people in any era, from the distant past to the vibrant present, equally desire a decent life, one lived with inherent dignity and respect. It is simply that some generations have had to live in such extremely harsh conditions that even maintaining the minimum dignity of a human being became a daily, exhausting battle, an unrelenting endeavor against overwhelming odds. When the sun finally set, casting long shadows, Berlin transformed, donning a different, darker, and altogether riskier cloak. What is now the bustling Alexanderplatz was, at that time, a rough, desolate, and unsafe space on the city's perilous periphery. By day, it served as a busy market and a crowded thoroughfare. By night, however, the area near Königstor Gate became a realm of deep shadows and palpable danger, where caution and vigilance were far more important than speed of movement. Flickering torches and dim oil lamps cast hesitant, weak streaks of light onto the ground, creating ghostly, uncertain shapes. Between these small pools of fragile light were shadows deep enough to completely obscure a person's face, making their intentions hard to discern, full of unsettling ambiguity. There were guards and patrols carrying lanterns, but they simply could not see into every dark nook and cranny, nor did they always arrive in time to prevent unfortunate, often violent incidents. The small, dilapidated taverns nearby were always packed with boisterous soldiers, laborers squandering their meager wages on cheap liquor, and lawbreakers living outside the bounds of legality, seeking refuge in the shadows. Brawls frequently erupted over gambling debts, blind jealousy, or simply the pent-up frustrations and oppression endured under a suffocating, rigid regime, finding their brutal release in alcohol and raw violence. A Huguenot merchant passing by, even in his relatively prosperous cloak, clutched it tighter and hurried his pace, for even the well-to-do understood how dangerous and perilous Berlin's nights truly were. Robberies were as common as daily meals. Murders were not rare either, a chilling testament to the city's grim underbelly. And if the victim was not a person of power or status, justice often arrived very slowly, or sometimes, tragically, never at all. Then, night leads us to the tightest grip of Prussia's formidable iron hand, the city gates. Here, Berlin abruptly ended, and the Brandenburg countryside began, with its sprawling fields and dark, imposing forests. As night deepened, the atmosphere at the city gates grew dense with stringent control, a vague, pervasive fear, and the relentless pressure of the impending closing time. The customs wall encircling the city, approximately 14 kilometers long, stood like a colossal brick and timber belt, an open prison, effectively locking down all movement. Who wished to enter, who wished to leave, who had to pay tax, who held a permit. Everything had to be meticulously checked, without omission, by vigilant guards. Not a single item could pass through the gate without accompanying paperwork, demonstrating the state's absolute unwavering control over its populace and commerce. A peasant family from outside the city, their faces hardened by the elements and etched with worry, tried desperately to sell the last of their cartload of produce before the gate slammed shut at midnight. That small amount of goods, however modest, could represent the fragile difference between life and starvation for a Berlin family in the approaching cold winter. But if caught inside the city after curfew without valid papers, they could face harsh imprisonment, their meager earnings confiscated. Nearby, a shadowy figure darted quickly through the darkness, their steps hurried and fearful. Perhaps it was a deserter seeking to escape Prussia's brutal military service, where iron discipline could break any will. If caught, the penalty could be death. No exceptions, no leniency. Guards checked everyone's papers, thoroughly searched every cart, and collected taxes on goods without missing a single penny. Smuggling occurred frequently due to the enormous potential profits, which could mean essential food for a family. But the penalties were equally ferocious in proportion to the risk. Hiding a small bale of silk could lead to a dungeon. Smuggling weapons could cost one's very life. And so, this was Berlin in 1750. Far from the city of beautiful, glamorized legends, it was not merely a bright canvas of the Enlightenment era, painted with lofty, idealistic visions. Instead, it was a city profoundly defined by raw survival, where life itself was an unceasing, exhausting battle. Every breath drawn carried the haunting, pervasive scent of coal smoke, and every step taken had to navigate the relentless currents of iron military discipline and surging economic transformation. It was a place where French refugees, diligent German artisans, rigid Prussian soldiers, and shrewd Jewish merchants jostled together in cramped quarters, vying fiercely for every scrap of living space, every precious morsel of food, and every fleeting chance to simply exist, to endure. But perhaps what makes this narrative truly resonate, echoing across the centuries, even today, lies at a much deeper, more fundamental level. When we read about a city like Berlin in 1750, it's all too easy to be captivated by the grand, sweeping details, the heroic panoramas. A renowned king, celebrated for his glorious victories, a capital asserting its burgeoning power, timeless architectural marvels, or magnificent national ambitions. Yet, the further I delve into this journey of discovery, the more profoundly convinced I become that the most memorable parts, the very soul of history, are often hidden within the forgotten stories and poignant fates of the humblest individuals. It is the mother meticulously calculating every penny, weighing every edible scrap of meat to nourish her children through a harsh, unforgiving season of scarcity. It is the child standing for endless hours by a heavy loom, their innocent eyes wearied at an age too tender to truly comprehend why they are so exhausted, why they cannot play freely like other children. It is the immigrant, arriving with invaluable skills, a fragile glimmer of hope, and the deep emotional scars of exile, still compelled to prove daily their inherent right to exist, to be an integral, valued part of the city they are helping to build. It is the farmer, waking before dawn, staking their entire precious harvest on a single, arduous journey, praying desperately that their family will not starve during the coming brutal winter. History, when viewed solely from above, through the privileged eyes of power and those at the apex of society, risks becoming a dry, sterile report on military strategy, political might, and abstract economic growth figures. But when we lean in closer, when we make the conscious effort to listen from below, from the ground up, history reveals itself as the vibrant, living memory of humanity, imbued with raw emotion. It is the lingering smell of coal smoke on worn-out clothes, the cracked and calloused hands from ceaseless manual labor, the restless, broken sleep in a cramped, stifling room. It is the chilling sense of helplessness when illness strikes without a single coin for treatment, the invisible fear accompanying a person throughout the arduous day, yet still prompting them to silently press on, never entirely abandoning hope. It is precisely these small, ordinary, yet haunting details that truly imbue the past with authenticity, soul, and profound weight. These are the very elements that compel future generations to pause, to listen a little more deeply, and to be more just to those who left no grand monuments in their name, those who quietly contributed and sacrificed so much, often without recognition. I believe the greatest lesson for future generations to embrace, to engrave upon their hearts, is not blind admiration for an era deemed powerful or golden. The true, enduring lesson is to cultivate a spirit of genuine inquiry, to question with sober skepticism. When a city flourishes, we must ask, who is being exhausted? Whose lives are being consumed to fuel that prosperity? When a society exhibits astonishing order, we must inquire, is that order truly protecting its people, or is it eroding and crushing them, stifling their very spirit? When an era is lauded for its brilliant progress, we must investigate, does that progress genuinely touch the meals, the sleep, and the dignity of ordinary people, of honest laborers? Because if we only gaze upwards at the glittering achievements, the dazzling pinnacles of history, we will all too easily forget that its most painful, most arduous parts always lie directly at our feet, where the smallest of people are tirelessly struggling, making their silent sacrifices. And truthfully, that is also what makes the story of Berlin in 1750 feel neither antiquated nor irrelevant in the slightest. It doesn't merely belong to a distant 18th century Europe, confined to historical texts. It resonates powerfully in the present, holding profound meaning and vital lessons for our own era, because in any age, people can be swept away by glamorous praises of economic growth, national strength, and unprecedented development, forgetting one crucial thing, to consistently ask how ordinary people are truly living, what unspoken hardships they are enduring behind that brilliant, often deceptive, facade. Whenever a society progresses too quickly, too hastily in its development, whenever power becomes overly confident, too arrogant in its sway, whenever achievements are prioritized and spoken of more than people themselves, history quietly reminds us to look closer, more profoundly. Do not merely ask how a city rose so powerfully. Instead, ask how it treated its most vulnerable, its most voiceless citizens. Perhaps that is the greatest new value, the most profound message this story imparts to today's audience. Not to make us pessimistic or melancholic about the past, nor to simply criticize history with the judgmental eyes of the present, but, more constructively, to learn to view humanity with deeper insight and greater empathy in every historical narrative. When we grasp the immense, often brutal price previous generations had to pay for what posterity so readily labels order and civilization, we will appreciate more deeply what we possess today. We will become less indifferent to struggling workers, to persistent poverty that continues to plague communities, to immigrants forced to seek livelihoods far from home, to children compelled to grow up too soon under the crushing burden of survival, and to those who lived their entire lives in silence, never once named or celebrated in any grand book of history. Therefore, if this story has prompted you to reflect, hold on to one thought, one guiding principle. Do not look at history merely with your eyes, with dry facts and cold figures. Look with compassion, with a heart capable of love and profound understanding. Remember that behind every great city, every grand era, every monumental name, there have always been countless small, ordinary people who silently bore the heaviest burdens, quietly laying down firm, unseen foundations. And if we remember them, if we are willing to listen to their silent stories, then history will not just be about past events, faded pages in an old book. It will become a vivid reminder, a guiding lighthouse to help us treat the present with greater kindness and embrace the future with greater responsibility. If you find this story worth pondering, stay with us for subsequent journeys, for the deeper we delve into history, the more we understand that the most memorable aspects have never merely been those who ruled the world or achieved resounding victories, but rather how the ordinary, humble people lived through it all, how they bore their burdens and made their quiet, often unacknowledged sacrifices.